So last class, we have finished chapter 7. So what we did in chapter 7? In chapter 7, we study economic growth facts. And based on those economic growth facts, we have developed two models. One is called the Malthusian model of economic growth. The other is solo growth model. The main difference is as follows. In Malthus model, the model was based on what we observed for the world before 1800. So this is 1800, before 1800. Largely, so there wasn't much growth in standard living, and there was no growth in population either. So Marshall's basic idea is that so growth relies on land, or production relies on land. And the land, so this is like per capita land, meaning so if there's a technology growth, write down, so if there's a technology growth, yes, it's going to lead to consumption increase, means that's going to lead to the standard living, okay, standard living increase, standard living improvement. But on the other hand, so the consumption increase is going to lead to population growth. The population growth, that's going to lead to land per capita is going to decline. Land per capita decline, that's going to lead to the production, which means C is going to decrease, or the standard living is going to decrease. So these two in the long run is going to cancel with each other. So that's why Malthusian model has a very pessimistic view regarding to the future of human society. Now, solo growth model, the main difference is that it understands there's capital, the role of capital. That's different from land. Land is fixed, but capital, you can use capital to produce capital. So hence, you can break the curse of this increasing consumption in Malthusian model. In a sense, so you have consumption growth, right? So you have labor growth, right? But then, so in the meantime, you have capital growth. So the capital growth is going to offset the decline in the production as Malthusian model predicted. Okay, so that's the key idea of solo growth model. In solo growth model, so we have discussed two things. Number one, in the long run, there will be zero growth. In the long run, the economy is going to reach steady state. Okay, so what determines steady state? So essentially going to determine by the following parameters: saving rate, technology, population growth, and the depreciation, right? So those are the key parameters in solo growth model. In the long run, the economy is going to reach a steady state. In the long run, there will be zero growth. But before we reach this long run steady state, the economy is going to experience some what we call transition dynamics. In the transition dynamics, the further away, like lower your K, the lower your K, and usually that means the higher the growth rate, higher the growth rate. And why is that? Is largely because the saving is going to bring you larger of benefit, because savings work as follows: S times Z times F of K. So lower the K, and then in the margin, so the contribution of saving is going to be higher because of marginal productivity of labor. So marginal productivity of capital is declining, meaning so the lower the K, the higher the marginal productivity of capital, meaning the higher benefit of one additional unit of capital. So that's why the lower K, the higher the growth rate in the short run. So that explains why some countries grow faster than the other. But in the long run, so we are going to we are going to reach steady state. So actually, this is called convergence, right? But then, so why we experience long run growth? Because it's not zero. Like in the United States, the growth rate is around 2% in the long run. Solo model is going to rely on some exogenous, unexplained factor, which is Z. So they rely on a continuous improvement in technology, in innovation, so that it can sustain 2% growth over a very long run, like a century. Now, the question is, what gives us this Z? What gives us Z? So that's the main topic in chapter 8. So in chapter 8, we are going to develop an endogenous growth model. So essentially, we are going to endogenize Z, or in other words, we are going to give a story or give a theory that explains why Z can potentially grow and why Z may vary from one country to another country. So that's the main topic of this chapter. Okay. All right. So endogenous growth model, essentially, this is a model of human capital accumulation. Or in other words, we are going to rely on a new concept, which is human capital. So the human capital accumulation is going to provide endogenous growth or to provide continuous Z growth in the long run. Right. Now let's just quickly review the convergence we have discussed in social growth model. So the convergence says if two countries initially rich and poor, but identical in all other aspects. In the language of the model, that just means these two countries have same saving rate, same TFP, same population growth, same depreciation. If they are the same, the only difference is one, let's call it K0, let's call it 1 is less than K0 of 2. Maybe you can just put a number here. So if example, this is Mexico versus US. Okay, everything else are the same. And then the social growth model just says, so these two countries eventually, so they're going to converge. Let's call it K star M is Mexico must equal to K star US. So these two are must equal to each other. But certainly before they reach to this level, Mexico is going to grow higher. Here, I want to also emphasize, if we look at the data, this convergence only holds if we look at a country who are similar. Actually, this is what happens, or what this model predicts. If you have the same S, Z, N, and D, yes, you're going to converge. But if you have something different in either of those aspects, then not necessarily you're going to converge. But that's what the convergence says. Actually, this convergence is coming from here, right? So you have, so this is the evolution of capital. Remember, that's what we discussed in the previous class, right? And then, so this line, this evolution of capital is going to cross with 45-degree line, meaning in the long run, you're going to reach here. How I understand that? If you have low capital, and then, so you're going to, so the benefit of saving is going to outweigh the negative impact of depreciation and the population growth. You're going to move to this direction. If you have a lot of capital, and then the benefit of saving is going to be dominated by the population growth and the depreciation, you're going to move to this direction. On the other hand, so the poor country versus the rich country. For the poor countries, the benefit of saving much higher compared to the benefit, compared to cost, or compared to the offsetting effect of depreciation and population growth. Hence, they grow faster compared with the rich country. But eventually, they will reach here. So this is a main prediction of social growth model. Right? Or in other words, so in the social growth model, you're going to see two different paths: poor versus rich. Right? So rich is going to start with higher per capita GDP. Poor is going to start with lower. And then for the rich, their slope of their path is going to flatter compared to poor. This slope actually is expand to the growth rate. But the difference in growth rate largely coming from the FK, or maybe just prime, which is the marginal productive capital. Right? But eventually they are going to reach the same level. Okay. Right. But then, so in the long run growth, what we rely on is they are going to have, so here actually, this is log Y. So instead of a straight line, you have an upward trend, but the slope of this line actually is given by Z, right? So that just means, okay, so if they have the same Z, yes, still, so they're going to converge to the same level in the long run, right? Except the DFB may differ across country, or in other words, here it could be the case for rich country, they have this path, but a poor country, they have another path. Okay, another path, meaning so they're going to have lower TFP growth. But then we need to understand why TFP may differ. And furthermore, so what kind of theory we can have that explain their difference? There are two possible explanations why TFP may differ across country. Number one, there exist barriers to adoption of new technology. And this barrier can differ across country. Two examples of barrier. Maybe there's labor union. What is labor union? The example of labor union, the biggest labor union in the United States is automaker labor union in Michigan. So essentially this is a union organized by those manufacturing workers. So the union, so their main purpose or their main goal is to protect the benefit of worker. And certainly, so the union is going to resist the adoption of new technology. Why? Because of the new technology essentially is going to replace part of the labor we need. So in that sense, that's going to reduce the benefit to worker. Hence, so labor union usually is going to create some barrier to the adoption of new technology. The other examples, maybe there's a barrier of entry. Why there's a barrier of entry? Just think about if someone want to enter this AI technology, AI industry. So there are two barriers. Barrier number one, this is very capital intensive because you need a lot of capital to build up your data center or to hire the bright mind to work for you. Okay, so the cost is very high in terms of entering this sector. On the other hand, so the existing players in this sector, they may have incentive to create a barrier for you to enter this market and compete with them so that they can keep their monopoly or keep their profit. So those are examples of barrier to adoption. But certainly, so this barrier to adoption is going to differ from country to country, and depending on their institution, depends on their legal system. So if you example, labor union in general is much stronger in Europe compared to in the United States, or in general, it's probably much stronger in a country that's more left-leaning in terms of politics compared to a country that's more right-leaning. So the difference between left-leaning versus right-leaning is that left-leaning party may cares more about equality versus efficiency, right? So this is the first possible explanation why TFP may differ across country. And secondly, economy may differ in how efficient factor of production can be allocated. There are two possible reasons. One, maybe there's corruption. So this corruption usually is a more prominent issue in a less developed country or in a poor country. So corruption essentially is just government officials, government bureaucrats, they are going to extract some of the rent from the business. Okay, so hence the business may not have the right incentive to do the right things. Another possible channel the corruption can affect the TFB is that the resource may go to the least, not the most efficient firms, so that the bureaucrats can demand some surplus or some profit, or so the bureaucrats may favor their relatives or whoever has closer relationship with them. So that's corruption. Now another barrier or another possible factor can affect the efficient allocated of resource is financial imperfection. Meaning, so whoever has a brilliant idea, they may not able to get the fund or the startup fund they need to start their business. Just imagine if the founder of Facebook, they don't have access to the financial system as we observed in the United States, think about in the developing country. Without the initial funding, the founder of Facebook or any big company you can think about, they may not able to realize or try their idea. Right, so this is how financial imperfection may matter to TFP change or TFP growth, right? All right, so now here, so this is still use the pseudo growth model to understand the importance of Z. So here we comparing two countries, a poor country, ZP, and rich country ZR, and poor and middle country ZM. So these three different levels, Z is going to imply different level of long run economic level, like long run standard living, long run physical capital, right? Just imagine if one country is managed to keep moving Z over time. So then, so clearly, yes, in the short term, they're going to reach to here, but then, so they're going to jump from here to here and jump from here to here. So that's why you're going to observe a continuous growth, like, for example, for the case of the United States, right? Actually, so we can have a case study, right? So to highlight the importance so highlight some important factor that can cause TFP to keep growing, right? So China has high output growth during the time period, particularly from 1980 to 2010. So the growth is average growth is more than 8%, very, very high. Okay, so they're sustained. But however, so despite their high return, their high economic growth, they managed to maintain or sustain high return to capital. So why this is important, or why this imposes a challenge for us to understand? So this is because, remember, so when economic growth, so K increase, right, and the Y is going to increase. So that's actually what we observe for China. But remember, we have marginal productivity of capital that declining, meaning so when K increase, eventually, so the marginal productivity of capital is going to decrease, or in other words, return to capital is going to decrease. However, if we look at Chinese data, so instead of the return to capital decrease, is they manage to sustain the return to capital, right? Why is that? Why is that? Okay. So now the story goes as follows. Essentially, it goes to the allocation of resource. Allocation of resource. Okay. So if you look at the Chinese economy, again, this is true pretty much for any particular for developing country, right? So they have, if you just look at their economy, and in particular, if we focus on business, okay, so that's where production happens. That's where innovation happens. That's where job was created. So we look at three type of firm. One is state-owned, and the other, this is a domestic private enterprise, and this is a foreign enterprise. And these two, usually we classify them as together. So essentially, this is private enterprise. Private, P stands for private, E stands for enterprise. And SOE, this is state-owned. And in general, so we understand this from lots of study and from basic economic instinct. State-owned, their efficiency is lower. Why? It's because they have the government as a guarantor, right? So the government is going to take care of them when they're not doing well or when they fail. So in that sense, state-owned usually, so they are less efficient. So there's lots of corruption, lots of low efficiency happens in state-owned, right? But now, if you look at the U.S., look at the Chinese economy, if you look at the period from 1998 to 2010, so 2007, so this 10 years period, you can see what happens is the private sector, their role becomes more and more prominent. Just look at the share, But then what this means, that just means over time, the resource is going to flow from state-owned to private sector. But remember, private sector, so they have higher efficiency, or in general, the private is going to have higher TFP. That's called PFP P, and here the TFP S, right? So this is higher. If you have more resource goes to here, and then so this TFP, their weight in the total economy is going to be bigger. And then, so if we look at the total TFP, that's going to be a weighted average, right? Let's just use a letter called alpha 1 times TFP P plus 1 minus alpha 1 times TFP S. If this increase, and remember, this is larger compared to this one, and then so the total number is going to increase over time. So that's kind of the secret behind their growth. So yes, they not only they manage to sustain high growth rate, also they just maintain the return. Because remember, so if you have more resource goes to private sector, in the aggregate level, you have high TFP. Not only that, so their resource goes here, and then so if you look at the overall, the average return, again, similarly, you can write down marginal productivity of capital, right? And then so you have two sources. One is marginal productivity of capital from here, the other is marginal productivity of capital from here. But the aggregate we observe is the weighted average of these two. And this one, so this one has higher marginal productivity of capital compared to this one. And hence, in the aggregate level, you're going to observe. So these things keep growing, right? So that's the main story. Now, in terms of the government policy, what the government can do to promote TAP growth, based on the discussion we have, the government should do the following. They promote competition so that each firm, they have incentive to adopt new technology. Each firm has the incentive to conduct R&D so that they can push the frontier of technology. Second, promote free trade. Free trade has two benefits. Number one, so this is going to, we are going to benefit from comparative advantage. So each of us, I mean, in terms of country, so we're going to specialize. We're going to push the frontier. Number two, so this free trade, I actually also going to promote competition, right? So you're going to import better goods and service from outside. So that's going to put some pressure on domestic firms who are producing similar goods and service. Either they switch to something they are more specialized, or they are going to adapt and then push their technology further. Right? Now, third, privatization. So essentially, that's give you the firms an incentive to do innovation, right? Lastly, so enforcement of law. This also is kind of encourage people to innovate. Just imagine if the property right is not well protected, and then the firm may not have the incentive to innovate because so they may not get the benefit of their innovation. Someone else is going to copy or is going to steal their idea. So that's why enforcement of law is very important. Okay, so those are the factors, those are the policies the government can choose so they can promote TFP growth in the long run. Okay. Now we are ready to develop an industrial growth model. And this model, we're going to focus on the role of human capital. Okay? And then later, I'm going to explain to you the difference of human capital versus physical capital. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you the difference. All right. All right. So we are interested at the end of this discussion. We hope, or we are trying to achieve the following. We are trying to answer the following questions. Number one, how does TFP growth respond to quality of public funding spent on public education? So the key is public education. Or in other words, so why public education matters to long-run growth. Secondly, so how TFP growth affected by subsidy to R&D? Okay, so here, so keywords R&D. Or in other words, how R&D is going to promote growth and how R&D is going to be important. And the third, does it make sense to have government intervene to promote economic growth? Okay, so essentially here, it's like what kind of policy the government can take to promote here or here, like education and research and development. Okay? But certainly I need to explain to you, so why these two things matters, or why we focus on these two factors, or how they are related to TFP growth. Okay. Let me start with explain to you human capital, and particularly, so this is different from physical capital. Human capital is defined as the accumulated stock of skills and the education workers have at the point of time. So this is human capital, right? Human capital, first of all, it is an investment. So in that sense, it's similar to physical capital because you need to invest, you need to accumulate. Okay? But different from physical capital, human capital largely is in the form of knowledge, right? knowledge is non-variary. What that means? You have the knowledge. You use the knowledge. It's not going to prevent somebody else to use the same knowledge. So this is called non-variary. Or let me give you an example of rivalry. Okay, what is rivalry? So for example, so your household, if you have like one car, okay, either with your parents or with a partner, okay, if you only have one car. And then so each of you need to go to different destination. Now, this car is a physical capital, and the car becomes rivalry. It means in terms of usage, meaning so if you drive your car, and then others in your family cannot drive the car. But knowledge is different. Like, so if you acquire the knowledge to drive a car, you have the human capital built in. Okay, so you acquire that knowledge. It's not going to prevent your parents, your partner, or whoever you know to acquire the same knowledge and to use the same knowledge. So that's the difference. And the third, human capital investment is not going to subject to the decrease in return or the decrease. Yeah, sorry. So human capital investment has a constant return to scale. Okay, so those are the three properties. Now let's see how we can write a model to incorporate human capital and to show the importance of human capital. Right. The best way to understand, so before I just show you this equation, the best way to understand is the following. Number one, the following model is going to build upon solo growth model. Meaning, so we already reached the steady state. That's the first. But now we are going to go beyond the steady state. By the way, steady state is characterized by a certain amount of physical capital, a certain amount of Z. But now we are going to go beyond steady state of solo growth model. Okay. Now, how we are going to go beyond? So that's Z. So basically, we're saying, okay, so you can produce Z, but in the solo growth model, you cannot. Z is given. Now you can produce Z. But how you're going to produce Z? Z essentially is technology. Z can be produced by human capital. Why? So, for example, you go to school, you learn the knowledge, or later once you got a job, you get some training, so you improve your efficiency. So that is how Z is going to improve by human capital, because either in the case of education or later to get some training, that's just you are trying to build up your human capital. But to understand that, the better way to think about is we have for the society, we have a pool of human capital. Okay, and now so we can divide human capital in two parts. One, this is the human capital we use to produce consumption goods. Well, this is maybe just think about like in the solo growth model. So, or in other words, in the solo growth model, we already have human capital built in. So that just goes part of physical capital. Now we're going to separate, or we just take a closer look at the human capital. You can use human capital to produce regular goods, as we discussed in solo growth model, like consumption. But in the meantime, you can use human capital to produce human capital. So this just says, okay, so I go to school, I take some training during work, right? And here, so we can say, so you have a total human capital. We have the one. But now here we say, okay, so you devote U fraction go to production of consumption goods, and then the rest go to the production of human capital. Okay. So now how we are going to use human capital to produce human capital is going to come up in the following slides. For now, let's see so how you're going to use human capital to produce consumption goods. Okay. So this is given by this equation. Okay. Consumption equal to wage times the human capital. So actually, this is the amount of human capital we put in here. Remember, like I said in the first part, so the entire model we are going to discuss today is built upon social growth model, meaning we have reached a steady state in terms of K, in terms of maybe N, like labor supply. Now we are going to add something regarding to Z, but then regarding to Z is the following. So here, this is going to help you to produce Z, but we maybe use like slightly different letters, okay? And then the rest is go to the original social growth model. Okay, so that's how it works. So you devote U times H, you devote U times H for the production of regular consumption goods. And the return, you're going to W. This is wage paid to the regular, the wage to pay to the use of human capital to produce regular goods. So that's your consumption. Okay. For now, we just simplify. There's no saving or this is not our interest. Here, our interest is how Z is going to change. Right. So we simplify C equal to your wage. So your wage income. This slide explains to you how we can use human capital to produce human capital. So remember here, so we have 1 unit of human capital. Okay. U unit goes to the production of physical consumption goods. 1 minus U unit, that just goes to here to produce human capital, right? And then the production of human capital, the production function is given by B, so this time is the entire input. Okay, and then clearly you can see this does not subject to the diminishing return to capital. And then why that is largely because of non-variary. So when we explain why physical capital subject to the margin, subject to the decrease in marginal productivity is because given the amount of physical capital, okay, you have marginal productivity. Now, if you just give you more physical capital, right? So you kind of get like crowded. So you get like so you hard time to use those things. So that's going to decrease. But knowledge is not going to subject to this crowdedness or to those congestion, right? Okay, so that's why we have this production function. Okay? So B essentially is efficiency in the sector of human capital production. And this is very much similar to Z, but now here this B is given, right? Now, furthermore, let me explain to you how we understand the U versus 1 minus U. There are 2 ways to understand. One is over your life cycle. Okay, typically you spend your first stage of your life, go to school. Like you have 12 years from K to 12. And then so you have 4 years college. And someone may go to graduate school, take another 5 years or maybe 2 years, depending on what degree you're gonna get, right? So in the total, you may spend more than 20 years in school. So that is like a fraction of your life cycle. So that's kind of expanded here. Alternatively, you can say for each individual, so you have like 16 hours. Now you have 16 non-sleeping hours. And then so every day you may spend like 2 or 3 hours, either just read a book or during the night you go to school or get some training. Right? So that's a fraction of the time of your human capital spent to build up better human capital, right? Because when you read, when you go to school during the night or get some training during the night, so that's going to improve your productivity tomorrow or in the future. So this is 2 ways we understand. So why there's U versus 1 minus U, because we are not spend all our time to produce the consumption goods. We also spend some time or effort to improve our productivity. So this is called 1 minus U. Okay, so this is how human capital is produced. Right. Now we look at the production side. So what do we have? Let's go back. So we look at consumption, right? Consumption depending on wage times the amount of human capital you use to producing goods, and the rest of the human capital used to produce future human capital. By the way, so here prime means next period or future. Okay. Now let's look at a production function. The production function is very simple. So Z is what we have in solo growth model. Okay. Now the output is going to depend on Z times U times H. I would say the best way to understand is Z is probably, you can just, best way to understand is Z is kind of the Y star we have in solo growth model. Okay, we reach the steady state. Now, given this steady state Y star, so now you can improve upon here by allocating or by improving or by changing your human capital level. So that's the best way, right? But now let's first to finish our discussion regarding to this production function and see what this means. Okay. So the firm profit is going to given by this output, like a revenue, minus the wage, right? So the wage times human capital you used, right? And end with Z minus W times U of H. Remember, because of the perfect competition, usually pi will drop down to 0. Why? Is this pi is positive, there are more firms going to join. There are going to be entry. Entry usually leads to more competition, is going to push down pi. If pi is less than 0, and then there's going to be exit, because there are some firm in the margin feel it's not worth the effort. But the exit usually is going to push out profit because there are less competition. Only when pi equals 0, we are in equilibrium. But now if pi equals 0, what this means? Means W equal to Z, right? So wage equal to Z, okay? So actually this is given by this diagram, right? So then, so we are here. Now we just plug in W equal to Z into the consumption function we have seen earlier. Okay, so C equal to Z times U times H, right? So Z is the wage rate, equilibrium wage rate. U times Z is the amount of human capital we allocate in the production of consumption goods. Okay. And then alternatively, so now you have this H prime equal to B times this amount of human capital we allocate in the production of human capital itself. So we do some algebra regarding to the growth of human capital. So on the left-hand side, that's the growth rate of human capital. Right, so where are we coming from? Let's go back to the previous one. Essentially, we divide by both sides by age, and then so subtract 1 on each side, and hence we end up with H prime age minus 1. That's the growth rate equal to B times 1 minus U minus 1. So let's go to this slide. You may be wondering why we care about this. We care about this is because, let's go back to the production function. We care about this is because, so certainly in equilibrium, HD equal to HS. HD is demand, HS is supply, equal to H. Right? Now Z, like I said, the best way to interpret it is a Y star in solo growth model. U is kind of parameter, so like what we decide, I mean how much we decide to spend the human capital in production of final goods or the goods we consume. Hence, the Y is going to completely relies on how age change. Meaning if age grow over time, Y is going to grow. If age stay, Y is going to stay. If age decline, Y is going to decline. Remember, this is just built upon the existing solo growth model, right? In the solo growth model, there's no this term, and then we are going to stay at a Y star forever. Now here, so we have a story to tell. This age is going to change over time. But how age is going to change over time, in the following slides, as I just explained to you, so essentially the growth rate, that's called GH, growth of age equal to B times 1 minus U minus 1, right? So this is growth rate. So this means this growth rate eventually is going to give you the growth rate of output. Okay, so that's why we pay attention to the growth rate. Okay. Now let's go back to that slide. Okay, so this is this one, right? So how we understand this? I mean, it's both in terms of its importance and its implication, right? First, so if this is positive, meaning so we can keep increasing our output, right? So the Y is growing in long run, right? This is first. But in order to make sure this is greater than 1, and then you need to, sorry, greater than 0, you make sure this is greater than 1. This show up in these slides. Right, so you can need to make sure, so the slope of this evolution of human capital line is given by this one, is higher than 1 or above 45-degree line. Okay, so you can just sustain long-run growth. But now the next question is, if this is greater than 1, what does this mean? And how we can achieve that? Okay, that's coming up. So let me copy that one. So growth rate of human capital equal to B times 1 minus U. Okay, minus 1. This must equal 0, so you can sustain growth. But how you can achieve that? Or what that means? So either you have very high B, right? You have high B, or alternatively, you have a very low U, right? So either you have a high value of B or you have a low value of U, so you can achieve a positive growth. But what this means, first of all, what this means, and secondly, what we can do. So B, let's go back to the previous slides. Let's see where we introduce B. So B is here, right? B is essentially the productivity in the sector of producing human capital. But where we produce human capital, which sector? Essentially school, right? Essentially like training. So that's where we produce human capital. So B just means we are going to make school more efficient. We are going to make our training more efficient. So that's B, right? Now let's go back here. And alternatively, so what U decrease means, remember, so we draw a picture. You spend U in producing consumption goods, 1 minus U to producing human capital. So now U decrease, that just means you sacrifice for today, okay? Or you sacrifice your earlier life, you go to school for your individual. And then for everyone, so every day, so you're going to sacrifice your time to do some like leisure or entertainment. Instead, you read a book, you get some training. So you reduce this U, and then you're going to increase this part. You can devote more resources, more effort to producing your human capital. So this is what this means. Very intuitive. Now, what we can do so that we can achieve a higher B and a lower U, start with U. What we can do is we can provide tax or subsidy through education. That explains in most advanced economy, K to 12 is free. Not only K to 12 is free, I mean, the public school, the college is highly subsidized by the government, right? So they are trying to encourage people to go to school, trying to encourage people to spend more time to get education so that increase this fraction. Now go to B, what B can do. So we can just make education system more efficient, but then the question is how we can make education system more efficient. I guess there are two aspects. Number one, we can provide better benefit to educators or give them incentive to do their job. Alternatively, so we can just give more resource for university or for schools to adopt new technology, right? So in either case, you can see they just goes to the second one, provide incentive into the school system. This incentive both in terms of incentive for the effort from teachers or educators. And secondly, so the effort in terms of doing research, R&D. Right? So this is economic policy and growth. Now let's see, so in the graph, see how things are going to change, right? So this is log C, right? So we have initial consumption path, and why this grow? Remember, so C is equal to W times, sorry, so now W equal to Z, right? So erase here. So Z times U times H, okay? Now, if we have a policy that's going to push down U, now you're going to see interesting trade-off. You push down U in the short term, if H is in the current, it's like H is fixed. You push down U, and then you're going to push down C. So that's what happens here. So C push down. However, lower U, higher 1 minus U, higher H prime, or this is going to have a growth in H. Now you can see, so in the long run, this is going to increase. So that's, you can see, just push out. So this is a trade-off. Trade-off is you sacrifice today, lower consumption, but you're going to have higher or brighter future. So that's the trade-off. Okay. Now, this model also explain the things cannot explain by solo model, which is the poor country and the rich country, they have different paths. Okay. So they both like grow over time, but then so rich country, they're going to have, so they are going to at a different level. What explains this level? Remember, so L, so this is L, sorry, this is C, right? So, but remember, C equals Z times U times H. Okay. Either because H is permanently higher than poor country, or, I mean, certainly, okay, so why their H is permanently higher? You can either you have lower U when you start, or you have higher B when you start. Okay, or in other words, so country, they different not only in terms of S, like we discussed previously, S, yeah, sorry, forget about Z, because Z, this is what we are trying to say, right? So they are different in the S saving rate, population, and depreciation. Okay. Even though they are same in all these dimensions, they are different in these two dimensions that are going to imply difference in age, but this is essentially we interpret it as TFP or Z. Yeah, that's explain why rich country and poor country, they not convergent. They are going to have different trajectory. But however, if you look at the poor countries, like a bunch of poor country, and then they are going to converge together. So that just means so they're going to have the same, these two, sorry. So they converge is because, so they have the same level here, same level here, but their U and B is different from rich country. Okay, so this is the convergence, right? So now we have a practice questions. We have a practice question. So again, so we are going to leave these to a review session, like an exercise session. Okay, so we are going to study those things together. Okay, to understand, to consolidate our understanding. To finish these slides, let's look at some discrepancy or something we may not able to explain, right? From the model. Income about richer country, they converged. Okay, but why it does not converge? Why we don't see the poor country to converge to the level of rich country, right? So one of the possible explanation is that the brain drain will create a difference in human capital between rich country and a poor country, right? So what is brain drain? So just essentially the smart people from will leave poor country to rich country for better life, better education, better opportunity. So hence this brain drain is going to create a difference in human capital. So that's kind of prohibit the poor country to eventually catch up with rich country, right? So these slides show you the brain drain. What are we seeing in the brain drain? So this is like old data, but this largely sorry. So this largely this pattern largely stay, right? So this is old data. In 2000, sorry, in 2009. Okay, so old data in 2009, right? So we look at what do we look at here? So those are the percentage foreigners who receiving their doctoral degree in 2002 and who will stay in US after 5 years. Now you can see, so there's the patterns, right? If you look at people who from a country has lots of opportunity, so if you know South Korea and Japan, right? And then the fraction of people stay is much lower. But for India and China, so the fraction is much higher. But certainly, like you make wondering, so why Canada and Germany, so they're also high, but they are a little bit different, right? So Canada is like a border is a neighboring country for the United States, so it's kind of indifferent and similar for Germany. I guess here, so the key things we need to compare is these two countries on the top versus these two countries in the bottom, right? So those are considered they come around the same region, right? But they are very different in terms of domestic opportunity, in terms of a domestic economic condition, right? And clearly, so you can see, so there are larger brain drain issue in these two countries compared to South Korea and Japan. So that just implies for South Korea and Japan, they have a higher chance to catch up with advanced economy like US in terms of human capital. But for them, they're going to have harder time to keep up with the human capital, right? To summarize what we did here in this chapter, we extend the social growth model. We start with the steady state, right? We start with the steady because in the social growth model, what happened in the long run, the economy eventually is going to reach steady state, eventually going to reach steady state, right? And then in the steady state, the K star is going to fix, Y is going to fix no growth, right? In order to achieve growth, you must have different Z. So that's in social growth model. But the social growth model is completely silent in terms of what the difference in Z come from, right? And in this chapter, we open this black box, we have a theory. So essentially, the Z difference coming from human capital accumulation, right? And why human capital accumulation is different is because largely two reasons, B and U, right? So what is B? So essentially, you have different educational system. Okay, what is U? So essentially, you have so people spend different fraction or spend more or less effort in the accumulation of human capital. But over the long run, you're going to list different trajectory for human capital. That just immediately implies different Z, and finally, that just explains so why you can keep moving up your long run level output and long run level of consumption.